Welcome to another episode of the Total Innovation Podcast. This chapter, or this episode, is one we've attempted to record a few times, and life and fate and internet disruptions and other things have got in the way of this. But I'm excited to hopefully today get an episode in the can that I've been looking forward to doing with a good friend of the show for quite some time. Rather than a long introduction to a friend, an entrepreneur, a very successful entrepreneur, a disruptor, someone that I admire greatly, who has advised and helped me along the journey that I've been on and continue to be on across the whole spectrum of open innovation, open talent, crowd, and open business models. I'd love to welcome to the show John Winsor. John, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much, Simon. Good to be here.
Good. Hopefully we've got some stable connection today. So
Yeah, let's hope so.
like some of these episodes are quite tightly structured. You and I talk quite a lot, and we bounce around a lot of different topics around the power of open, right? And open business models. As I said, I learn a lot from you, and our story goes back quite a few years now. But maybe before we get there, maybe you can tell your story and how you found your way into this wild west world of open networked business models.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Simon. So, yeah, it's been a long journey. I was thinking about it. I think I'll tell a different story than I did the last time, just because I think it's probably a better story. And I've had so many more conversations. My journey started a long time ago, and as many of us, in our 20s who are ambitious, I wanted to do big things. I started a little sports magazine called Sports and Fitness Publishing here in Boulder, Colorado. And my wife was a professional triathlete, and I had this opportunity to buy this magazine called Women's Sports and Fitness out of bankruptcy. And it meant that I had to put everything I had on the line, like my house and everything else, to buy it out. So, I needed some advice, and I went out to Nike. And at the time, Mark Parker, who eventually became the CEO, and Tinker Hatfield, who's the creative genius behind Nike, they were mid-level guys. And I asked them, well, what do you think? This mid-80s, and I said, do you think women will do sports? And they said, yeah, I definitely do. We'll run an ad with you. You definitely got to start this magazine. You got to restart this magazine. And so, it meant a lot of soul searching on it wasn't really an effort of like, is the market right? Because I knew if I could get the costs right, I could make it work. And so the big thing that I did, and it was a radical shift in magazine publishing, is that Time Inc. owned Women's Sports and Fitness at the time, and they had 40 editors and writers. So imagine that a writer would come to Boulder, Colorado, to interview a climber, like a rock climber like Lynn Hill, to write about the article. The issue with that for a lot of magazines is that the writer in New York's not a subject matter expert, and so she comes out and talks to Lynn, and she doesn't get all the facts right, and then the outcome is that the magazine's just not very authentic. People that really do those sports are all of a sudden saying, it's nice, but it's from a New Yorker's perspective, or it's from a outsider's perspective, and doesn't know the nuances. So I decided, because of economic reasons, to flip the paradigm. I actually hired two good editors who were both athletes, moved them to Boulder, got rid of the 38 other folks. And then what I did is I had the readers, the people like Lynn Hill, write their own stories, and then just had editors that knew how to edit the story for the audience. So it just seeped with insider info and really deep knowledge, and that flip really made it work. And so all of a sudden we went from a money losing magazine that was draining my bank account to one that was making money, and that really kind of set the tone for women's sports and fitness, or women's sports, going forward. So I got to be involved with that crazy, the culmination of, with working with the Women's Sports Foundation, of the rise of women's football, the rise of women's basketball. And it was a really great time. I built the company to be 10 magazines and about 200 people, based on the same principle. Let's have our readers do the writing, and then have our editors just edit the magazines. And it worked really, really well. I called that co-creation, and I sold that company to Condé Nast. And what I was interested in is this idea of co-creating with customers deep in marketplaces. It was such a new concept back in the late 90s, and nobody really did it. So I started a company called Radar Communications and wrote a few books. I wrote 2 books on co-creation, at the time, and it was all about that, like how do you go out and co-create with your customers. And we had a research and strategy company in the innovation space. That's where I was squarely in. We helped Nike and Levi's and GM and Intel and HP, a bunch of global companies. And the basis of our philosophy was not to do focus groups that were out of context, but go into people's closets or in people's rooms and do video ethnography. That seems de rigueur these days, but back then it was such a new thing. And that worked really well as well. And so we had all this momentum, and this guy by the name of Alex Bogusky came to Boulder, who was, you know, a bit of a savant in the advertising business. Small agency, had about 100 people. And we started riding bikes, and I was frustrated because I was selling Radar Communications, my research and strategy company, to WPP globally, and it just wasn't going that well. I'm not a big company guy, and so Alex and I decided to merge our companies. His company was called Crispin Porter Bogusky. We went on this crazy. We put co-creation at the center of the strategy for the agency, and we went on a crazy run. We won $3 billion worth of business globally. Microsoft, Domino's, Volkswagen, Burger King, Coke, Miller, and became the creative. Let's see, what is it? The global creative agency of the decade, and really seen as pushing the envelope on a lot of creative stuff. A lot of us just fueled by insights, or even, you know, letting customers be in commercials and really connecting with them, to allow this kind of ecosystem to grow. So that was super interesting. You know, I got into the idea of crowds that were not our, you know, customers, because we ran out of people. Like we went from 100 of us to 1,200 of us in 2 years, which was a crazy ride. And we kept winning this business, and we won this small electric motorcycle company. And the crazy thing is so we didn't have any creative to work on it. So Alex and I came up with this idea of like, let's crowdsource the creative. And as you can imagine, if you're the, you know, global creative agency of the decade, the idea of crowdsourcing creative to the advertising industry, which was so parochial and arrogant about who gets to be creative, who doesn't, it totally blew everything up. And the crazy thing that we noticed, you know, and I think you probably noticed in the work that you guys do, is that because it's this, you know, project based, you know, like focused on interesting things. You know, the creative director we tried to hire from London, but her husband had a big banking job and she wouldn't move to Boulder. Or, you know, the really hot young creative in Australia who was a surfer, didn't really want to come to the mountains. All of a sudden they were doing work for us for marginal cost, variable cost, right? So we didn't have to worry about hiring them, move them across the globe, not being a good fit. And that worked out really, really well. So I started a company called Victors and Spoils, which is an ad agency based on crowdsourcing principles. And from an entrepreneur, it was one of the craziest rides, because, you know, we had this concept and three of us in the garage, and we built everything, but I had reached an agreement with Stuart Elliott from the New York Times that we wouldn't launch the company until until they did an article about us. And they were nice enough to do a 3/4 page article about our launch. And literally, we started the morning with three of us in the garage, bank account getting sucked dry. And by 12 hours later, we had 3,000 people sign up to do work for us. And Dish Network, the satellite provider, gave us their $110 million advertising business, about a $15 million creative fee, so from 0 to 15 million in 12 hours. And it was quite the run, but that ended up, you know, causing quite a stir in the advertising business. And I joined Havas in Paris as chief innovation officer, which was really great. But I think, you know, what we see and what you and I have talked so much about is like even the best ideas, you know, we know from all the work that I've done at Harvard and at NASA that work's produced, you know, as good or better results, 4 to 5 times faster, 8 to 10 times cheaper. But it's the mid layer of most organizations that are on the demand side that have such a struggle with this. Like, what does it do for my job? Like, what does it do for my ego? How am I going to look if somebody comes in as a solver off the, you know, out of kind of left field or out of the world? And that kind of led me, you know, Harvard took note and started following me around and did a case study on Victors and Spoils, being born open. and Havas changed faster. It was a debacle at Havas. The CEO got fired. I got fired. We were just too entrepreneurial. I ended up being at Harvard, and now for 8 years. It's been amazing, right? 8 years. It's been a long time since you and I connected. Those first few years, but 8 years I've been studying this stuff and trying to come up with models, and obviously that's what I did with the book Open Talent, is try to figure out what are the models that I've been using for a long time that you've been using, that how do we take this so it's ordinary and boring for the organizational side of things, right? So companies can say, oh, there's a Harvard methodology, I don't have to be so scared. And it's been a long road to hoe, but I was just back there last week, and I'm amazed some of the what I would call institutionalists, professors that are kind of very dyed in the wool, doing things for a long time the same way. All of a sudden, in conversations with me, were like, "Well, I think this whole open thing might have some legs, especially in the age of AI and this idea of the democratization of expertise." So I don't. Sorry for the long intro.
No,
You
but
can.
that folks is the reason I didn't do the introduction, because I could never do that thing justice, and that's the paraphrased version as well, and not just because there's a few years passed between in there, but because all of it's so goddamn impressive as well, right? And like
Thanks, man.
really, really early adopting, really early disrupting. But also, I guess my reflection on that is, as you've just said, I feel like we might be reaching a paradigm moment. We might not be as well, right? There's a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
proof, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of evidence, right? And you continue to do the work through Harvard, and you continue to to produce great books like the Open Talent book, and others, and language and literature around networked ecosystems. If we do go, well, this might be a moment in time that goes, okay, all the legacy, all the hard work, all the luck, all the data points sort of set a foundation. Like, what is it that might be different this time, do you think? You mentioned AI, and maybe that's part of the factor, but like, what is it that's driving perhaps that paradigm moment, and what might that mean from an organizational perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty simple guy, and I try to keep things really, my framework's really simple. And the thing I always come back to is in highly disruptive times, right? The best thing any organization, whether they're a 3-person organization or a 30,000 person organization, they have to have a really strong balance sheet. You've got to have some powder in the barrel to make sure that you can get to the future. Well, in order to do that, the best way to do that is to move more fixed costs to variable costs. And if you're going to do that, then the best thing to do is, the place that most fixed costs are for most organizations is the labor. And so I think you'll see a big shift from labor. Now, I think in the context of AI, and what we're seeing is that that's not going to be all human labor. It's going to be human and synthetic labor. I've been hearing some really astounding stories. I mean, there's so many out there, but one I heard the other night, I was giving a speech to a bunch of talent professionals, and they work with Amazon, and they say, they've been supplying labor for Amazon at a lower level to do text customer service, and they know the cost of that engagement is about $8. Amazon has just replaced that with an AI, customer service solution that is 10% better is quality from the customers, and radically fast and radically scaled, and it costs 5 cents. So you've got $8 to 5 cents. And I think the future is going to be those providers that can help companies taskify the work that needs to be done. And I think in your case, it's innovation, right? I mean, Ian and Shoning and I had a great conversation the other day about this. Like, I think the reality is anytime, or at least you and I've observed the same things, right? Most large companies are really nervous about change. And so we saw this in the open talent space, right? It's like, we know statistically, like I said, from the NASA research, that it's better, faster, and cheaper, that solutions kind of are really, there's a lot less friction. Yet organizations just aren't built for that. And so they put up roadblocks and barriers and try to protect an analog way of working. And my sense is that AI is coming so fast. There's some great new BCG research that says that 1,400 C-level folks they've interviewed, 89% said Gen AI is a top 3 priority, but 90% of them say that it's they're still observers. And so I think what we're going to see is that there's going to be more and more pressure on the board and the CEO level down to say, what's our AI solution? And the quickest way to have an AI solution is to say, oh, I work with Simon in innovation. We use the Wazoku platform, and they're driving AI through our innovation process. Just by using their platform, I know I've got that solution. I mean, it's just those changes are just too scary for organizations to be able to metabolize themselves, right? Which LLM do I pick? What pathway do I pick? Things are changing so fast. It's to build an analog structure around something like that, just to have it disintegrate 3 weeks later is really difficult.
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently because I did an exercise on Wazoku for Wazoku that was looking really at what doesn't change and what are some of the fundamentals, and then what might change, right? And what needs to change as well. And I think that there's aspects of what makes a good business that will always be true, right? That there are, and at the heart and soul of all of that, there are sort of very basic fundamentals of you need to build great products in some way. You need to sell and market those great products against some level of brand and quality differentiation. You need to make sure that you do those and make as much profit as you can in your margin, and then you need a whole bunch of other operational stuff that will help make the business work, right? So kind of simple and rudimentary. Right. I was looking at this and going like, is innovation even really a thing, right? Clearly there's inputs, throughputs, outputs, but ultimately, if the objective is to maximize and unlock maybe new forms of business value, maybe that's what we want to describe as innovation. I'm not super precious about the definition, because I think it doesn't have to be net new either, right? But we're trying to unlock business value. What does that mean? Well, it goes back to the sales and marketing aspects of that, or the R&D aspects, which might be called innovation or engineering or something else, or the risk aspect, right? We want to diminish risk in some way, shape, or form. And then you talked about the taskification of work, and I think that somewhere we get lost in all this language, right? So we have this idea of what is innovation and what is it not? Like, what is the future of work? And I think people roll their eyes when they hear too many of these things, and perhaps because they're unimportant, or because perhaps they're super important, and we've just broken them in our thinking too much. I know you're doing some work at Harvard's D Cubed school, and maybe you can talk about what that D Cubed is, and maybe some of the things that you see coming out of there, and whether, is it new language around this? Is it revisiting old language? Does it need to be rethought in a totally different way, or is it really kind of small tweaks and iterations on top of, I don't know, perpetual truisms about just how business works, right? And we as a species like to overcomplicate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to that principle, right? If you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less, and so I think a lot of organizations are right in that space right now, right? They need to figure out. One of the things I think one of the things that's interesting in the Harvard work is that because of the Harvard brand, it gets the attention of C-level folks, and the ability to cause organizational change from the C-level suite is really inspiring to me. I think that's part of it. I mean, I think we've seen all this kind of bottom up usage of open talent tools and open innovation tools, and now AI, right? 25% of all of us, probably more than that, are using it on a daily basis. Yet organizations, are just unwilling to go down the road of like, how do I adopt this? And it's just scary, right? And so that's the place that Harvard's playing, is what does it mean? How do the classes, or how do the research and the process create a sense of tension, right? I would say even fear, like this is happening. Here are the tools, and here's what's happening, and coupled with a safe and secure way to go forward, like advice to say, hey, it might be scary out there, but we've figured out a way, Mr. C-level person in a big company, to help you go forward in a new way. And honestly, I find it really fascinating is that the power of that brand is almost a hammer that the C-level can use. I mean, it's one thing to use, a consulting company like a Deloitte or an Accenture to drive change, but that's pretty de rigueur, right? But if you can, get the attention of the right people at Harvard and they can help drive the change, it's just a lot. It's really fascinating being inside there and watching how big organizational leaders pay such attention to that and then are willing to drive change to keep that connection. Because one of the things that's so crazy to me about Harvard is they have so much momentum. They just get really disinterested. If you're a C-level guy and you say, I want to, come in and do all these really interesting things and study these interesting things, and your mid-level data guy can't provide the data for whatever reason, whether it's you know, concern about their own career or whatever. But Harvard just doesn't get in, they're just not interested. Like, sorry, here's your money back. We're not gonna, we're not involved. We're not gonna be involved in that. And and I think that kind of scarcity, I think there's a real interesting thing going on, right? It's like, and I think that there's a lot more power in scarcity now in this world of kind of ubiquitous abundance. I was thinking about this in the thought leadership area, right? It's like everybody has a point of view on LinkedIn. And when everybody knows that the algorithm is going to, pay attention to DeepSeek and its reaction, every person in the world has to write their opinion about what DeepSeek's going to do, to whatever marketplace it is. Well, it's interesting. It's just the amount of noise is
Overload.
incredible
Yeah.
compared to the signal. And I think that really applies to what you guys are doing, right? It's like the ability to have a trusted partner that can help sort through the noise and find the signal is really, really difficult. And that's what I've loved about our conversations is usually the stories that you tell me about working with clients are that like they've tried really hard to solve some kind of problem. It's been really difficult. They've canvassed the world, but they need an outside perspective. They need a trusted partner that can sort this kind of noise into signal really, really quickly. And so my sense is that that's what makes that place so magical. It's such a scarce research. Sorry, it's such a scarce resource, and the ability to kind of tap into it is very difficult, and so it makes it that much more valuable. And so that's part of like the signaling of change, and I think that's super important. And then I thought it was super interesting. Like Kareem Lakhani is teaching an RC, a required course for the first time. It's the first new required course change in 25 years. And that course is AI and data. And so every first year MBA student now has to take a required course on AI and data. And I think it's a great thing. You know, while I think Harvard feels like, at least from a brand, that they're kind of old and stuffy and changes slowly. I'm going to teach a class at Denver University this semester, and just a couple day seminar, and they don't have any policies and
Yep.
they don't know what they're doing. They're not teaching anything about it. It's just the Wild West. And so I think the ability to kind of, the great thing about Harvard is that the ability to get attention for whatever, the framework is, and create some momentum around that is really important. So the effort right now that Kareem's doing and a lot of others are just studying this kind of democratization of expertise. What does it mean? How does it work? But getting deep in with companies and doing experiments. Just finished a big experiment that's public on the changes of AI as they look at the consulting business. And BCG partnered with that, really willing to kind of show the results publicly on what's it mean to have a consultant alone do projects, qualitative and quantitative, and then what's it mean to have a consultant with AI and then an AI only. And what we saw in the results was that AI only and human and AI is up there, and the consultants by themselves kind of have lost their edge.
Languishing. Yeah.
Yeah, but what's really interesting is that, and I think this really points to the power of what you guys are doing, is that it wasn't that AI was that much better, especially for things outside of frontier, like new things, right? Like
Yeah.
still human ability to do things outside that frontier is really important. But when a lower level person used AI, they often beat somebody. They most of the time beat somebody that was more experienced without AI. And so I think there's this ability for people inside an organization with less experience to do more. And I think what you'll see in the context of open innovation is by giving, crowd members or team members inside the Wazoku crowd the ability to use AI tools. It's a superpower. It's like when a company buys Wazoku, they're not buying Wazoku anymore. They're buying super Wazoku, which means that every solver has in the system the ability to use an AI to help partner and solve problems. Still down to human judgment for those nuances and those kind of new insights. But I'm seeing that that's probably the paradigm, right? It's almost like an Iron Man suit that we all get to put on when we go on our computers to solve problems and create new things.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. And I agree with you. And we spend a lot of time, actually not so much time up front, debating what our policy was. And my policy was that, let's let AI be in the loop, but make sure it's in the loop, right? It can't be exclusively that, because anyone could do that, right? And
Right.
there is an argument that says, well, anyone could do it, but not anyone will do it. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not really relevant for me. I think there's an element of novel and an element of, I guess, human thought that needs to go into the type of work that we're trying to bring and do, that requires a human in the loop, probably more than 51%, right, of that
Right.
effort to be there, but that augmented with that makes absolute sense. It's like having a multifaceted team alongside you without having to have a multifaceted team alongside you. But can you just talk a bit? So you journeyed. We've gone around your career. The one area we didn't spend much time talking about is the work you're doing with Open Assembly and this network piece, which I know overlaps with the work at Harvard and everything else. But maybe talk a little bit around that and the general evolution as you see it of this human synthetic open talent marketplace.
Yeah, so Open Assembly's been on this great journey, and we started, and you were involved with it. We started early on. We had a small group of folks that met on a regular basis during COVID, kind of blew the doors off that and made it very public and created these kind of regular weekly calls. And I think all of us needed that at the time. We were lonely, we were in our houses alone, and we needed that connection. Uh, what I've what I've what I've found lately, back to that kind of awareness, is that it's time to get to work. It's like let's change behavior, let's do things, because so many people are just talking about things, spewing new ideas. It's really hard to sort kind of the wheat from the chaff, right?
Yeah.
And so, what I've been doing at Open Assembly is still, we're not doing these kind of free monthly calls anymore that, had a lot of great people, and there were really fun conversations, but it didn't feel like we were doing anything, right? It was like, oh, there's lots of great stuff on the latest research and what's happening. Our real focus now is like, how do we aggregate the smartest people in the world? How do we hold, some events at Harvard to connect them with the best researchers? And then together, how do we figure out in a trusted, more closed, more scarce environment, some real operating principles that can help change the way things get done? Because I don't think there's not enough action right now, right? It's back to that BCG, level of, yeah, the, you know, there's a lot of awareness and it's an important strategy, but yet nobody's doing anything. And I think somebody told me this funny thing that said that, OpenAI, besides NVIDIA, OpenAI has had the, most revenue growth, right? In kind of this space because of their wild success of their LLM. But from a percentage standpoint, guess who has had the second largest revenue gain percentage wise? Any guesses?
God knows. Microsoft?
It, No, it's been Accenture.
Oh,
It's
really?
Accenture because everybody in the world needs a their
Yeah.
AI strategy deck. Now, that doesn't mean anything's getting done.
Yeah.
It means that a lot of chairs are moving, moving on the deck, and people are feeling good because they can report up the line with a new deck to, get improvement. And I don't know about you, but I'm just in that place in my life where like enough already on the next deck, right? Let's build some shit. And I think
Yeah.
that's to me, that's one of the great things. Terrifying, right? Terrifying for large companies that are used to going through this process. We all have an opinion on Elon Musk, and I find him, an enigma in so many ways and disturbing in a lot of ways. But one thing I really respect about him as a CEO is he sees himself as a chief problem solver. And so he goes into an organization, one of his organizations, let's say Tesla. Well, let's say XAI, and instead of going through and saying, well, what's slowing us down, and talking to his, executive board, who goes out to the VPs, who go out to, the head of engineering, who goes out to the engineer. And then 3 weeks later or 2 months later comes back with a deck to Elon going, here are the problems we've analyzed and here are 3 solutions. Elon just walks down to the engineer and says, what's the problem? And, let's just say in this case, engineer will say, we just don't have enough NVIDIA GPUs. Elon picks up the phone, calls Jensen and says, hey, I need some more GPUs over here this afternoon. Can you get them to me? And, and I'll pay whatever you need. And the problem is solved. And so I think that's part of it, right? Is like, how do we have more action and less talk? And I think that's really where these open ecosystems really work, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but my experience is when I need something like, help with a deck or help on something, I call one of my trusted freelancers to help me out on it. It's not like I have to go through, bureaucracy to make sure that somebody's, like has space in their job, or they're traveling that day, or they're on vacation. Like, the world's abundant. You can get that talent really, really quickly and get the work done. So I would suggest that part of, looking forward is it's like, how do we help organizations? How do organizations have faster cycles, right? Turn things in a much, much quicker way to get the results they need. Because time's the enemy, right? Time's the enemy of innovation. You let things lag and the world changes, and you miss the window of opportunity.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I've done a load of these podcasts now. I was talking recently to the former head of innovation at PayPal, and we were chewing through some of the things that he'd seen and done inside that organization. And part of that narrative was looking at the sort of IP pipeline and the development of things that he himself is not an engineer. He came into innovation via a different route, and yet had a number of design patents against his name that had really built his profile internally using open tools. And I think that for some people, there's still going to be a career path that goes into a company and spends a lifetime there, right?
For sure.
For other people, there may be a career path that never does that, right? Yeah. And finds ways. And most people will be somewhere in between, right? It may be corporate people, they may be not. But there is definitely a change in that narrative. But within all of it, I think what's unequivocal, obviously I'm very biased because I live and breathe it all day, is that the open approach is better than the closed approach always.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the brilliance of people will surprise you, and the brilliance of people plus AI will probably surprise you even more than than that. I do think there's a big skills piece to that, but even that I think can be a bit overblown sometimes. It's like, if you ask people, they surprise you generally, and we're just not very good at asking people. What do you? I'm going to flip us a little bit into looking forward, therefore, right? And maybe you haven't got another startup in you now, and you're building things that you're doing, but like, is the future open, and what should leaders be thinking about in terms of the future of work and the future of how value might be unlocked and created inside organizations going forward? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, hey, organizations, at least the organizations we know today, were all built in a time of scarcity, built on, Peter Drucker's, great work, and Jim Collins's great work. But all those paradigms are about, like, you have scarce resources. You got to find that one engineer, that you got to hire them and got to go through that process. You got to find that one resource with the right minerals to get to, delivered here at the right time. And because we've taken off, we've created technology that's kind of removed all these frictions, especially communication frictions, that all of a sudden things are so rapid and the price has become so low that it's much easier to do things. And so you don't need that kind of highly skilled person that could go find that one thing. You need an abundance of stuff. So my sense is that organizations are going to get a lot smaller. There's all this mythology or memes around, the one person $1 billion company. And I think that's really possible. I think that, like I said, strong balance sheets, flexibility, the ability to pivot really quickly. Organizational structures are going to be digital, and digital is all about community, aggregating people around a problem really, really quickly, whether that's, creating a following on social media or solving a business problem. Those things are really interesting. The one thing I did this thought exercise the other day, and I think we all forget how much innovation's happened, right? So I was thinking back, and I was at Boeing for a meeting, and they play this great video when you go in as a visitor, and they show this idea that, in the late, I guess, maybe even the early, 20th century, the idea of getting a letter from New York to Anchorage, Alaska took 5 months because you had to put that letter on a ship.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden planes came along, and then it got down to 5 hours. And then today with an email, it's zero. And so the cost of communication is radically reduced. I also did this other thought exercise. I'm sure it's something you've done, but I was thinking about what's the, on our phones, like what would be the cost of all the materials we have on our phones? Like if we pay $1,000 for these phones, but it's estimated with the books and the access to the information and the music and everything, it's between $50 and $100,000 worth of stuff that would actually be 2 moving vans if you had to carry it around.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of radical shifts. And
Yeah.
while we're able to adopt that personally in a really good way, I don't think companies are really geared to that. So I see 2 things. One is innovators doing the good work to push the boundaries and do new things. But the real work is like, how does that get adopted? How does that get, implemented and metabolized inside organizations? And one of the things that I'm really impressed with lately at Harvard, I just connected with Bharat Anand, who is head of strategy. He and I did some work together early on. He did a case on me, and then I helped him build HBX, which is the precursor to HBSO, Harvard Business School Online. So we built HBX, and we built Harvard Business School Online, and then he became vice provost, and we built Harvard Online, and so taking the whole university online. And one of the things I'm just in awe of with Bharat is his ability to be super innovative inside a very conservative, not changing environment or unchangeable environment. And it's because he knows all the pathways, and he knows exactly how to build consensus and build momentum and tell a story in a really good way. So I think folks inside organizations need to be better storytellers,
Yeah.
better ability to build consortiums or movements, but then relying on external talent, whether it's synthetic or human, to actually do a lot of the heavy lifting of the executional work. But it's going to be more about the personal relationships and how do I get people to move and change and create safety and security for those folks. So
Yeah.
that's my
Well, as you
sense,
put it
right?
earlier, how do you get shit done, right? I think that's the like.
It's
There's a lot
unbelievable.
of talk. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of noise. You're right. I love this. The concept of signal to noise, and there is just a lot of noise out there. And I think that maybe in this hyperbole around AI, that's the thing that I think is I'm most excited about. Is it if you find a way to use it well with the right level of data. And
Right.
that isn't necessarily large language models. I think that the interesting shift now as these models get more specialized and smaller, having trained on top of a bigger model, is the power comes actually from distilling the noise, getting away
Yeah.
from it, really focusing that that attention on the right things.
Hmm.
And that's a challenge when you've got tools that can just produce more and more and more and more noise, right? More and
Yeah,
more and more
exactly.
context. I'm going to start to wind us in, and there's a lot of places we could take this, but the other area we haven't spoken about so much is the book, right?
Mhm.
So in all your free time sitting around enjoying when you're not surfing or researching or advising or inspiring, you found time over the last couple of years to write the book as well, Open Talent. Maybe just talk a little bit about that and some of the the interesting things that emerged from the writing of that as well.
Yeah, thanks. Wow, it was quite a journey. You were along with me the whole way, and I have to say, when I looked at the area of open innovation, that your models and your process is definitely by far the most developed and outstanding processes, and certainly ones we
Big
adopted
time,
in the
John.
book. But I think I, I I've been an entrepreneur, right, all my life, and it works. The open talent and open innovation works really well in small company using it as a operational model for that size company, right? Whether it's 50 people, 20 people, 10 people, 2 people. The problem is that there's been historically so much revenue from kind of analog, old ways of working that it's really slow. And so, trying to change the paradigm is really, really hard. Some people are brilliant at it, like Elon Musk, who just says, I'm going to commit everything and I'm going to be singularly focused on electrifying cars and I'm just going to punch it and go for it. But I think for the rest of us, the mission really is like, how do we create safety and security and systems and processes that allow for, people to change their hearts and minds? It's interesting. One of the things that I've been struggling with lately is I kind of have felt like, Open Talent, the book was it, and it is in one viewpoint, the 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 digital transformation of talent writ large, like HR and staffing and outsourcing and innovation. That presupposes that HR and staffing and outsourcing and innovation talk to each other and that companies have this total talent strategy. And that's just not the case, right? Like we kind of have been talking about in the context of some of the things that need to be done before Open Talent haven't even gotten done yet. So in most organizations, the theme that I've heard in the research that I've done is that, well, HR aspires to, CHROs aspire to a place where they can be at the C-level seat in a more substantive way and understand everybody, how work gets done by people or even by AI. But they got distracted after COVID because nobody came back to work and they had to throw out all their policies. And the majority of people in the HR world are really focused on compliance and making sure the company doesn't get sued, right? And so they're totally distracted. It's not about like getting the work done or doing great work. It's about over here. And so it seems to me that we've got to focus, and that's where I've been really focused on lately is how do we help organizations with innovation or staffing on the project basis. Like, I need to get work done. Like, I don't have anybody to do it. Like, HR can't hire anybody. How do I do it? Here are some ways. Use a great platform like Wazoku. Use another platform to do Open Talent like Graphite that you're partnering with now. Those are really great solutions. And I think that's a worldview. It's going pretty well. I think that we're seeing a lot of movement, but it's slow. Organizations are really nervous about it, and traditional ways of working aren't there yet. I was super impressed just with the momentum. First of all, the adoption of the term Open Talent. I mean, freelancing is great, but it's very much of a niche and not a philosophy.
Yeah.
But I'm really inspired by the work that Ronstadt's doing. Ronstadt has taken, unlike our buddy Mike Tushman's, explore exploit, and there are some people that are trying to do that in this kind of staffing industry. We're saying I'm going to open an office in some innovative place, and then learn a bunch of stuff, and then bring it back to the center. My hunch is the world's changing too fast. So I really like what Sanders doing at Ronstadt. His message to the whole of Ronstadt's 30,000 employees or whatever, how many people they have. His point is like, look, you remember those things called travel agencies? Do you guys use a travel agent? Well, we're just a talent travel agency. So if we don't change, we will be out of business. So this kind of wholesale change that needs to happen. And I think you're seeing some of the best players in the world start realizing, especially in the motivations AI, to say that it's going way too fast for us to be the expert at everything. We have to have great partners and connect with people outside the world. So that's been the focus of the book. The book's done well. It's bestseller and we sold a lot of copies but it's led to a bunch of really other interesting avenues for change in places like Harvard to create new materials and new research that will influence more people. And that's really where I've been focused on, is like, how do we help the demand side feel more safe and secure for these new messages? One of the issues with startups these days is that, as like anybody with a laptop can start a company, which is awesome, right? Becomes, again, back to our paradigm earlier, there's so much noise out there. And where's the signal? Who are the people that are really going to make the difference,
Yeah.
instead of just talking about making the difference? And I think that's part of the issue for companies, right? They look at the market and they say, we have so many opportunities to work with new kinds of labor models. I don't even know where to go, and how do we focus on the right ones? So that's been a lot of the effort lately, but it's going well, and really appreciate partnership with you and all the great work you're doing at Wazoku.
Well, listen, thank you. And, congratulations on a journey to here. I think, many would have kicked back into retirement and surfing and relaxing and other things. And yet we're still here fighting the fight, right? And trying to
Trying
make
to.
sure that we, and I think this, I'm gonna like maybe ask you for one final closing thought on this, and maybe a final closing thought on how do you feel now, right? Do you feel optimistic or otherwise about the not the long term, because I think we'll eventually get there, but the shorter term, maybe the next few years horizon about this, and whether we'll see a sizable change or not in that really important piece of like not talking, not producing content, but actually getting shit done, right? And I think that is the problem. Like, how do you feel about that?
I mean, it's already underway, right? Like the companies are new companies are being more born every day that are changing the world and rocking things. I don't think there's any stopping that. I think it's only going to be accelerated with AI, the ability to execute that much faster. Um, my hunch is there's going to be a lot of innovation washing going on, right? Like, and I think there's going to be this adoption. And so I always look to the advertising industry. It's like, it just blows me away, right? The advertising industry, when I was at the tail end of this, but the advertising industry, it was considered radio, TV, out of home, and a couple of other smaller things, right? Print. But there was this big digital thing happening, and these companies like Razorfish and Sapient all were born because the big advertising agencies didn't think that digital was a thing, and then they didn't think social media was a thing. What's happened is all those agencies still exist, those holding companies. It's just that none of the people that did that work are there, and all the digital people that were kind of these outlaws out to the side are now controlling those companies. So I think you'll still see organizations that have great brands, that really have done a good job of focusing on customers still there, but they're going to be gutted and become digital companies, totally different organizations. And I think that's what you'll see in the short run. I think it's happening really, really quickly every day. And my only concern is the speed at which the world's changing. Can our society metabolize that? I think we've seen other radical changes and the ability, they happen slowly enough that people, there could be a drop in employment in one sector, but the rise in employment in another one was successful. This is just such a radical shift. And we're in a place where a lot of people are feeling let's burn the thing down and restart. And that's a really scary thing, I think, for society. Can we survive that? Do our base fundamental foundational institutions, can they stay stable? And what does that mean for the way the world works? I don't know.
I'm not sure I want to leave us there. It feels a bit existential, but I'm going to, and
Okay.
We're going to commit to pushing out as many, and maybe calling out as many of let's ban innovation washing. I was actually talking to a client today who 7 years of their work, they'll go unnamed for now, but 7 years of their innovation work has been unwound in a call from the CEO. And I stopped to think about it. My initial reaction was, wow. And my follow-up reaction was, I'm not sure they should have ever done that work to start with, right? Yeah. And it's like, I wasn't brought in to advise on that, right? I've been a part of a small part of a small part of it, and constantly pushing for more, right? And really trying to get the organization to truly embrace the things it needed to embrace rather than the things it was doing. But I think in reality, it just shouldn't have ever been doing those things. And so
Right.
it was another classic, innovation theater or other things. And the curtain closes eventually, right? The theater shuts.
Yeah. And it's all, and I think that's the big message, right? It's all okay. Like the world changes. The world changes way more than we think. We try to desperately, as individuals, hold on to the way things are, all the while the world's changing really quickly. And I think it's sort of like you can stand by the stream and be terrified by the speed of the stream, or you can just jump in and let it take you where you're going to go. And that's the only way to live, right? There's no other choice. Too much tension sitting on the side of the stream.
Exactly. Well, let's grab a beer. Let's jump in that stream. Let's see where it takes us. John, thank you. Sure. And thank you so much. Right. Like I said, I've learned a lot from you. This has been a great episode. Just chewing through examples. Where can folk find you?
Just, johnwinsor.com or open-assembly.com are the two easiest places. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm everywhere, but again, trying to really focus on more, deeper, change. And so not having my head up as much as I've had in the past, because I really feel like it's time for all of us to get to work and get deep and change things,
Yeah,
really,
you can
really
find you
do the
hanging
work.
out with me while we try and get shit done, right? That's exactly the point. So,
Exactly.
listen, thank you very much. Thank you everyone to listening to this episode. I'm trying to mix these up now and make them not just as formulaic as some are, and so some are structured, some are a bit less so. But mostly it's about pulling out the bits. We've had an entrepreneur here who's built, disrupted, changed, was really early in understanding, I think, a very important open movement that actually I think you could argue has shaped much of the economies of the world, but just without really thinking about it in that way. As I said, I think we are involved in something, but we're somewhat still stuck in business models that perhaps are 50, 60 years now, coming to the end of their life cycles and need to be rethought of differently. So keep following John. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Check out historic episodes and also check out the future episodes by hitting subscribe. And we'll see you again next time on the Total Innovation Podcast. Thanks.
Thanks so much.